welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So it's the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. 60,000 left libs don't donate to Obama if he cuts Medicare or Medicaid. Well, he's well on his way. He trotted out this slimy reptile, Plouffe, David Plouffe, Obama's speechwriter. Instead of somebody with some policy background even, they send out essentially a shameless spin doctor and sophistic demagogue out of the Gorgias school, the guys who gave Plato so much trouble at the time. So there is a rebellion, but a rebellion gets us nowhere. We need a primary challenge, dear left liberals. Do you guys exist or do you not? All evidence says you don't exist. So you want to exist, you better go out and prove it. Now, this is simply the beginning of the flaying of the American people. We have, of course, the Ryan budget, the reactionary Republican budget. Now, as I am recording the program here on Friday afternoon, April 15th, we're going to have the vote on the Ryan budget, which is the destruction of Medicare and indeed of Medicaid. It cuts the top rate for rich plutocrats from 35% to 25%. Corporations also. It ends Medicare. It replaces it with a voucher, you're given the voucher and you're on your own. And if you can find coverage for that money, fine. If you can't, tough noogies. Medicaid is made into a block grant. Most people think this is only the poor. This is middle-class families with their older people in nursing homes. The Republicans stress everybody 55 and up is protected. So they say we're not offering genocide now. Genocide will begin later. And, of course, the demagogy here is that if they really attack the people who are now retired, 65 and over, then Florida and many other states become impossible for the Republicans. I hope this is the case. The cutting of food stamps, the cutting of the social safety net, completely destroyed. Ryan proposes $6 trillion in cuts over 10 years. There's no end to this. You cut the budget, the deficit gets bigger and bigger. The Republican mantra, of course, is the United States is bankrupt, the United States is bankrupt. This reminds us of Schacht back in Weimar Germany, right? Later became Hitler's finance minister. His big thing was to go around saying, we don't have a balanced budget, we're on our way to bankruptcy. We've just had this incident, or several incidents, half a dozen of them, in which air traffic controllers of the Federal Aeronautics Administration, FAA, have been asleep in control towers because they're working the night shift and they're there all alone. You want to see where austerity leads in terms of the breakdown of civilization? Try that for size. This has now been reversed, but this was an austerity measure. The FAA has been fighting its workforce for years, all during the Bush era. So, result likely to be riots this summer, and Obama and the Republicans can fight about who's responsible. Now, we also had Obama's austerity ghoul speech. Obama wants to say, I am the thinking man's austerity ghoul. I am moderate and balanced, but I am an austerity vampire up there with the best of them. He proposes cutting $4 trillion in 12 years, not quite as radical as Ryan, at least not on the surface. So what does Obama have in this? Well, let's start with a death panel. As we discussed during the healthcare debate, Medicare already has death panels. There are two that you can identify easily from the outside. One is called IMAC, and the other is called MedPAC. And IMAC and MedPAC, look them up, look behind the acronyms if you want. These are areas of rationing. Now, Obama had proposed, he had actually given a recess appointment to a guy called Berwick, known here as Butcher Berwick. Butcher Berwick was for a time the acting head of the Center for Medicare Services, in other words, the Medicare program itself. And Berwick is the guy who says, rationing is inevitable. The only question is, what kind of rationing will we have? Now, that's the Democratic Party approach. The Republicans are going to kill you through the anonymous mechanism of a market. They'll say, here's your voucher, go in the market, and if you can't find anything you can afford, then that's the market telling you that, not a bureaucrat. Democrats prefer faceless bureaucrats. So on the one side, we have the anonymous workings of the market. On the other side, we have faceless, nameless, and unaccountable bureaucrats. Fortunately, Berwick was so smelly that the Democrats have dropped him. So Obama, I think, is still looking for a new head of Medicare to carry out his version of genocide against the American people. The new death panel, though, what Obama proposed this time is to make the Independent Payment Advisory Board into the main death panel. The Independent Payment Advisory Board would be given authority by Congress to make the cuts, and the only way the cuts could be rolled back is if the Congress voted to override the Independent Payment Advisory Board. Now, later in the show, I'll make the comparison between the current moment in the United States, here we are in April of 2011, and the moment in April, May 1930, when the last democratically elected government, you might say, in Weimar Germany, the Müller-SPD Grand Coalition, collapsed. After the middle of 1930 in Germany, you don't have any government that has a majority in the parliament, in the Reichstag. And we are now approaching that point. There's a Bonapartist element. In other words, the Congress giving away its authority to superintend Medicare according to the wishes of the people is going to be delegated, as Obama says, to a commission of experts, physicians, consumers, and others who are guaranteed all to be austerity ghouls, oligarchs, people like Rivlin, like Simpson, like Bowles, and the rest of these austerity ghouls. So, death panels. Interesting, this time the Republicans don't say death panels. I don't see anybody saying death panels, but this is a death panel, Independent Payment Advisory Board, death panel. The other Bonapartist element that Obama has is the fail-safe trigger. And this is, I put out a tweet on this, Obamageddon 2014. Obamageddon 2014 is that if the austerity cuts are not sufficient to do what he thinks has to be done, then there will be an automatic provision for some kind of rescission, cutting, which will take place in the year 2014. Now, this goes back to the Graham-Rudman-Hollings budget bill, the Deficit Reduction Act, as it was called. Graham-Rudman-Hollings, which really was unconstitutional, but was never found to be so by this gang of Supremes that we have. Graham-Rudman-Hollings, the planned train wreck. In other words, if you haven't cut the budget enough, and if you have a deficit, then you will have automatic across-the-board cuts of everything. In other words, every item in the budget cut by 3%, 5%, 10%, or whatever it takes. Now, that, of course, is another abdication of responsibility by the Congress, by the equivalent of Parliament. It's a Bonapartist idea that at some point you're going to go into receivership, and some commission, which is not part of the Constitution and is not elected and not accountable to voters, is going to make the main budget decisions. This is exactly the wrong way to go. But that's what happened in Weimar. That's when Hindenburg called in Brüning and said, look, you don't have to have a majority in the parliament. I'll simply make all of the bills you want into emergency decrees, and operating under a state of emergency, I'll dictate the austerity. And the result of that after 2.5 years was Hitler. So you destroy the economy, you destroy the economic system. Now we've also got, there's a whole proliferation of these austerity ghouls. We have got any number of them waiting in the wings. I think the important thing to see at this point, Obama is a Wall Street Democrat. He's in the tradition of Grover Cleveland, Woodrow Wilson, Al Smith, Davis, and these other non-entities during the 1920s, Truman, Carter, and then Obama. Those are your Wall Street Democrats. They're anti-Roosevelt, anti-Kennedy, anti-LBJ. They're against the main positive achievements of the Democratic Party. Dump Obama in 2012, and we'll be back in a minute.